that was a German. So anyway, and they got very angry at me. The Soviet soldiers got angry at me too, because every couple of minutes their sound disappeared, their dialogue disappeared. And this son of a bitch, they figured out he's the one who's sitting there and he's turning down the knob. So they came and waved their tummy guns under my shoulder, under my nose. I wasn't afraid of them. They had liberated me, so what I was going to worry about. So that was my beginning of showbiz. Later on, I did become a legit actor. And when I came to America, people asked me, what do you want to do? I would like to become an actor. Well, if you're willing to starve for about 5 years, maybe you'll make it. I said, no thanks, I had to starve already for 5 years. So I became a messenger. I became a messenger. Behind. Sure. I'm a ham. I'll do anything. Anyway. Any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm curious about the laws that allowed you as half Jewish to not be immediately sent to a concentration camp to be killed, to be a prisoner instead.
First of all, I don't believe in being half Jewish. It's like being half pregnant. You're either A, or you're ain't. I volunteered to be a Jew for a bicycle, for nothing. Anyway, they had two kinds of mixed breeds, two kinds of Michelin, half and half. One was Michelin first degree, mixed breed first degree. Somebody who in September of 1935 was not part of the Jewish community, was not registered with the police as being Jewish. My mother had, when I was a child, always registered, you had to be registered with the police, had religion, none, which was accurate because I had no religion. But I became a bar mitzvah in 35. Now I was a Geltungsjude, a person who is considered a Jew. And as a Geltungsjude, I became subject to all the rules and regulations pertaining to Jews. Except when the deportation started in 42, I was not a deportation case because I lived in this house, in a household with my Aryan mother. So that was the division. I think that's what you asked for. I don't know. Yeah. So there were two kinds of quote half Jews. I've always considered myself a full Jew, even though I knew nothing about Jewishness. I learned about Jewishness when I went to the 92nd Street Y, courtesy of Mark Tannenbaum, who was Georgette's husband, Rabbi Tannenbaum. Yes, sir.
Is it true that Russian troops committed atrocities to the German civilians and raped
They did what? I'm sorry. Russians?
I had heard that the Russian troops, when they conquered Berlin, they did lots of atrocities to the civilians. Is that true?
The only thing that you might call an atrocity was they raped about 100,000 women. The Germans expected them to kill everybody, to cut their throats, because the Germans knew what they had done. The Russians didn't, but they raped. And a couple of times my wife-to-be was in danger, because they didn't, besides they didn't care whether it was true or not. Anyway, so raping was yes, and killing was no. They plundered a lot, but the Germans did too. Berlin was a city of 4 million people before the war. A large city. For 3 weeks, right after the end of the battle, there was no law. It was completely lawless. You could do anything you damn pleased. People went into villas on the outskirts, got the chandeliers down, broke into safety deposit boxes in banks. There were millions of marks, of the ice mark, lying on the floor. Nobody bothered to pick them up because nobody thought they would still be valid. They were, because they had a swastika on it. So it was a completely lawless thing. And we were in the middle of it. We had no food. We were not interested in chandeliers, in cameras, in whatever. We were looking for food, and it was a very tough thing to do. We finally managed to kill a cow, which walked down the street. From some, what do you call it, milk, milk is being produced. I can't think of the word.
Dairy farm.
What?
Dairy farm.
Dairy farm. There was a dairy farm for children, milk. So this cow had liberated itself and walked down the street. And normally I love animals, but we were terribly hungry. Now how do you kill a cow? We've got a Russian soldier to shoot it for us. He shot it, and then it was lying down. How do you take it apart? A cow's hide is awfully tight, awfully tough. And we only had dull knives. Oh, did we sweat for 2 days to get through that hide? We finally made it, and we finally got the meat. We found the cooking pot. We made a fire. There was plenty of wood around all the time, everywhere. And we made a fire and we ate the meat without salt, without anything else. We ate the meat. We were hungry. And, you know. I'm sorry, I forgot your question. Anyway, the Russians, there were Russian Jews who helped us. Jewish officers. I never saw a Russian Jew who was not an officer. So, and we managed to make contact with some of them, and they as nice as you could expect them to be. Russian Jews were more sympathetic and more understanding of our situation than American Jews. Americans had not experienced what the Russians had experienced. So they were more removed, more, you know, distant.
Yes, but first, I want to thank you for your willingness to share your story with us. It's so moving and it means so much to many of us here.
You mean it's very important to me that contemporary Jews, American or otherwise, should have some idea about what went on. A few years ago, we got together with, we just walked together with a couple who live in our building. I live in a very nice building, the UN Plaza. And they said, well, you know, put it all behind you. You're now American citizens, you live in America. Forget about it. And I said to them, do you celebrate Seder? Oh, sure. You know what it commemorates? Our exodus from Egypt, which happened about 3,500 years ago. And you are have the chutzpah to tell us 50 years after the greatest disaster that ever befell the Jewish people to forget about it? How stupid can we get? Yeah? But they're super Jews.
My question to you is, you seem to have such a joie de vivre and you have survived so many tragedies in your life. And to what do you attribute your...
My chutzpah and my warped sense of humor. And I drop it, I'm pretty left-handed by now. And I live alone. I drop a dish. I say, oh, look at this schmuck, what are you doing? I think life can be very funny. And I've had plenty of tragedy, but I think it can be funny. And I laugh, I like to laugh. Sometimes I tell myself jokes and then I say, I know the joke. And I like pretty young girls, I must admit. I'm a very old man. There's an organization called Dorot. Ever heard of it?
Yes.
And they called me after my wife died and said, do you need any help? Do you need somebody to take you to the doctor or shopping, whatever? I said, all I need is the company of pretty young girls. And they've been sending them to me ever since. And I take them to concerts, I take them to classical ballet, which I like, the American Ballet Theater. What? So as long as I live, I try to enjoy, I love nature. I go to the Botanical Garden in the Bronx, as this lady knows, almost every week. And I enjoy nature. And I know the end will come soon enough, so don't worry, don't hurry. Yes, sir?
At which point, as a prisoner in Berlin, at which point you became aware there was a genocide going on?
You were in Berlin before you knew there was a genocide?
Yeah.
When did you know
At which
that there
point
was
you
a
became
What?
aware there was genocide going on?
Now?
No, when did you know that there was a
Oh,
genocide?
when did I know?
Yeah.
When you were
And
in
how
Berlin?
did you know?
Well, I didn't keep records, but I knew that, you know, as soon as Hitler came to power, Jews were persecuted. My father was an architect. He lost his business very quickly. Of course, Jews were, the German institutions were cleansed of Jews, the governmental agencies, the theaters, the movie, etc., etc. And then it became worse and worse and worse. With every passing week or month, new rules came out. Jews may not do this, and Jews may not do that. After the Kristallnacht, Jews were not allowed to go to movies. Jews were not allowed to go to the beaches. Jews were not allowed to whatever, you know, to theater, and so on and so on. Of course, I did it all anyway. I never took no for an answer. I was scared stiff when I went to the movies. I wasn't supposed to. But most German Jews thought if they obey the rules, they'd be all right. That had nothing to do with reality. They were not all right, no matter what they did. Whether they obey the rules or not. Yes, ma'am.
Your father was a Teresa?
Pardon? Theresienstadt.
Outside of Prague? Is that
In Czechoslovakia.
Was he sent from Germany to Czechoslovakia and then, or did you said some Germans and
Well, I knew he was taken to Theresienstadt.
From Germany or?
From Berlin, yeah. In recognition of his services to the fatherland in World War I. And in '44, I happened to meet two Jews who came from Theresienstadt to Berlin, to our prison. Why? They were accountants, and they had done the books for the Jewish community in Berlin. And the Gestapo couldn't make heads or tails out of these books. So they took these guys back from Theresienstadt and said, you straighten things out. And I asked them, do you know my father? They said they did. I don't know if that's true or not. I said, what happened to him?
You know?
They said, he died of, what's the word? When you can hold your what? Dysentery. He died of dysentery. And for 2 days afterwards, I knew that something important had happened. Something was the matter. Something was important. And I couldn't remember what it was. And later, much later, I figured out what happened. My electrical thing was overloaded, like you do in electrical current. What do you call it? A something that blows. Fuse. My emotional fuse was overloaded. I couldn't take anymore. So for 2 days, I didn't remember what it was. And then I remembered. And I assumed that he either died of dysentery or was taken to Auschwitz. It's 90% of the Jews in Theresienstadt were. So one way or the other, he died a miserable death. Because to be in a gas chamber, it's bad news. Yes, sir.
Have you been back to Germany
Yes.
until a year ago?
I've been invited to have a program in Berlin to invite ex-Berlin Jews to come for a week, all expenses paid. And they've had this program for at least 40 years. While my wife was alive, we decided we're not going to go. We're not going to give the goddamn Germans the PR advantage. Look, the Jews came kiss and make up. But after she died, they really came after me. And I decided, I'm going to go. And it was very interesting. I knew the city. I knew at least the western part of the city. We used to live in the western part. I knew the building where I lived with my parents, except the building was no longer there. It was another building. The building had been destroyed. And I knew the street names, but I didn't know the buildings, because the buildings were almost all gone, or else they were refurbished or repainted, or whatever. It was a weird kind of experience. And I went to the synagogue where my wife and I were married. It was tough. But I went again the next year. I got another invitation. I'm buddy-buddy with the mayor now, the mayor of Berlin. We're like this. And his interpreter, he speaks English but haltingly. His interpreter is one of my closest friends. She called me today from Berlin, by the way. Very sweet girl. And so I have contacts in Berlin. And as I told the mayor, for 60 years I hated my hometown. For 60 years I hated the Germans. But now I've become older and mellower, and I also know that almost all the Germans today were not old enough to be involved. Their parents might have been, but they weren't. And I get along. And I have never, and I've been back to Berlin now 3 times. This year I set out. Next spring I hope to go back again, if they'll take me again, for nothing, you know. I'm always a sucker for free road. And every time I go to Berlin, I atone by going to Israel afterwards. I love Israel. So even though according to halakha, I'm not a Jew, I don't care. I know I'm a Jew, so to hell with halakha.
What happened to your mom?
My mother was bombed out, the whole neighborhood where she lived was bombed out in November of '43. And she barely escaped being burned and all that. But she did manage to escape, and she moved to a town in eastern Germany called Gera. In those days there was no East Germany or West, you know, it was '43. So she moved to this little town and stayed there until she died about 25 years later. She was never accosted, she was never bothered.
Did you reconnect with her after you?
My mother died about 25, 30 years ago. I mean, how old do you think she can get? I'm already 86.
No, I mean like right after you, before you came to America, she was
yes,
there, so.
we had contact with her, and we even visited her in Berlin about 12 years after the end of the war. And my wife and I, on our first trip to Europe. And yeah, she was still there. So, you know, I don't know what else to say. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I couldn't recognize a female.
Did you ever wish that you hadn't had your bar mitzvah for the bike?
Even though I lost the bicycle, I'm never sorry. I'm proud to be a Jew, even though I'm a lousy Jew. As far as religion is concerned, I'm an atheist. But the Jews, for me, are my people. I identify with the Jewish people. For sure. What are you going to do? So I'm very happy that I'm a Jew, even though it almost cost me my life. But nothing this forever, so I managed to get away with it. Yes, ma'am.
When you were in the prison camp parts of your experience, did you use any emotional or mental strategies purposefully to get yourself through each day?
No, I just tried to get enough food, which I could never get. I was terribly hungry. One of the worst tortures that I've suffered. I was not in Auschwitz. Was hunger. And after we came to America in '47, even for another year or two, I could be full with food up to here. I was still hungry. This psychological mishigas. So that was one of the problems. I've never been sorry that I became a Jew. As I say, I'm certainly not a good Jew. I identified, the first 12, 13 years of my life, I identified myself as a German. I love Germany. To this day, I like German parts of German culture. I can still recite you, don't give me a chance. I can still recite poems by Goethe. I know, music, Beethoven, Mozart, whatever, Haydn, so on and so forth. I love classical music, Bach. So I'm still very much into that. I even remember a lot of Nazi songs, because during the Hitler time, that's all I heard on the radio. So, yes, ma'am.
Did you have any children?
No. We decided we wouldn't be emotionally balanced enough to have Germany. Yes, sir.
What do you think is the future of German relations with Israel and with the United States?
I think Germany is an ally of America, even though under the Bush administration, it wasn't easy. And I think Germany is an ally of Israel. Conscience, bad conscience, whatever you want to call it. And I found that the Germans that I met in Berlin and the atmosphere in Berlin, they recognize they accept the history. It's not easy, but they accept it. More than other countries, like Lithuania, for instance. These bastards, they still hate the Jews, and they still blame the Jews for what happened. The Germans are different. And the Germans, if you have ever been in Berlin, they built a very impressive monument in Berlin. And I'm not one to particularly be impressed by monuments, but the 2,700 stones without inscription near the Brandenburg Gate, near the heart of the city. A very impressive site. And by the way, speaking of impressive sites, I did one more moment. When I go to Berlin, there is a Soviet War Memorial, Soviet Victory Monument. There are two actually. One is in East Berlin, while East Berlin was part of the German Democratic Republic, and the other one is just west of the Brandenburg Gate. I helped to build it. How come? And about 3 weeks after the end of the war, we figured it's no point staying here in the prison. It's not a place to hang your hat. We gotta find something. So every day I walked to the area, the neighborhood where I used to live, which was a middle class, upper middle class neighborhood. And one day after coming back in the afternoon, I see civilians digging a big hole. It happened to be in the Tiergarten, which is sort of the central part of Berlin, but nicer than center. And they were digging a big hole, and around stand soldiers, Soviet soldiers. And as I passed by, come. So the guy gives me a spade and points out, go down, dig. I didn't know what it was for. I did 2 spadefuls. And then I said to myself, I'd be damned if I work shoulder to shoulder with these goddamn Germans. What am I going to do? I climbed out of the hole, and there was a Soviet sergeant there, and I said to him, Ja, Ivrei, which means I'm a Jew, nix rabota. I'm not going to work here. I didn't know how he would react. He grinned from ear to ear. Go. But every time I see this monument and people stand around, I help build it. Why not?
You become part of the community, I guess we could call it. Thank you, Phillips.
Thank you so much.
That's my check.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On that note, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this evening's event. There are refreshments in the room next door, adjacent to the archives that we have on display for your browsing. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you again.